You're sacked. Consider it a wedding present, love." The text glowed up at me from the screen of my phone, and for a long second I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from champagne and adrenaline. I was standing in the small flagstone courtyard behind St. Mary's in Parnell, the hem of my gown gathered in one hand, my bouquet of white peonies and native fern still resting in the crook of my elbow. 20 minutes earlier, I had said my vows to the man I loved. The celebrant had pronounced us married. And now, while my new husband was inside the church being congratulated by my nan, the son of the man who owned the firm I had given everything to, had decided this was the perfect moment to let me go. I read it again, then a third time. Effective immediately. Don't bother coming in on Monday. Consider it a wedding present, love. The cruelty of that last word, love, sat in my chest like a stone. Fletcher Halloran had been calling me love for 3 months now, ever since his father had handed him the keys to the engineering studio I had helped build. He said it the way someone might say, sweetheart or darling, and every time it landed, it felt like being patted on the head with a closed fist. I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. My husband, Reuben, came around the corner holding 2 flutes of bubbles, that crooked smile he always wore at functions still on his face. He took one look at me, and the smile slid off. "Posey, what's happened?" I held the phone out. He took it, read the message, and I watched his expression do something strange. Not anger, not shock, something quieter. He pressed his lips together for a moment, looked up at the sky where the gulls were wheeling over the harbor, and then, very slowly, he smiled. "Reuben, did you hear me? I just got fired. On our wedding day. He sent it 5 minutes ago, while we were signing the register." "I heard you," he said. He handed the phone back. "Put it away, my love. Please. We've got 130 people in there, waiting to throw confetti at us. Whatever this is, it'll still be a mess on Monday. Today, we dance." "How can you be calm?" "Reuben, that job is everything I've worked for since I left Otago. The downtown light rail tender, the harbor bridge upgrade documentation, all of it has my fingerprints on it. He cannot just—" He took my hands, the phone trapped between our palms, and he kissed my knuckles the way he always did when he wanted me to listen properly. "Posey, I need you to trust me. There are things I haven't told you yet, because I didn't want them on your shoulders this week. But I promise you, by the time we get back from Rarotonga, that boy will wish he'd never picked up his phone today. Now please, switch it off, give it to your sister, and let's go and be married." I looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a kind of patience that bordered on certainty. And so, against every screaming instinct in my body, I handed the phone to my sister Edie, told her to keep it in her clutch, and I let my husband lead me back inside to the cheers of our friends. By the time we cut the cake, 3 hours later, that little Samsung in Edie's bag had logged 104 missed calls. I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Posey Westbrook. I'm 29 years old, born in Whangarei, raised in a state house in Glen Eden, and until that text message hit my phone, I was the senior systems coordinator at Halloran and Quinn Structural, one of the older engineering firms in Auckland. We did big civic work, bridges, light rail corridors, council infrastructure, the kind of jobs where if someone cuts corners, people get hurt years later in ways you read about on stuff.co.nz. I got the job 5 years ago, fresh out of a postgrad in project management at Auckland Uni. I was the youngest hire they'd ever made for that role, and I knew it, and so for 5 years, I gave that company everything. I built our internal tracking system from scratch after the old one crashed, and lost 6 months of drawings during the Three Waters consultation. I wrote the protocols we used for cross-checking engineering sign-offs against council submissions. I trained every new graduate that came through the door. By the time I was 28, I knew the back end of that firm better than anyone breathing, including the founder. The founder is Desmond Halloran. Des, to people he liked, and he liked me. He'd come up the hard way too, from a fitter and turner apprenticeship in Hamilton in the 70s to running one of the most respected engineering houses north of Wellington. He used to bring his own lemon slice to morning tea on Fridays in an old ice cream container. He treated me like a niece. When my dad passed away in my second year there, suddenly, a bad heart we hadn't known about, Des sent flowers to the Tangi and rang my mum personally to tell her what a credit I was. I cried for an hour after that call. I met Reuben Carmichael during my 3rd year at the firm. He worked for Auckland Council, on the consents team. He was the man on the other end of the email when our drawings went in for sign-off. We met properly at a council briefing about new seismic standards, and he made some quiet, dry comment about a rival firm's submission that made me laugh out loud in a room full of suits. We had coffee the following Tuesday. By the end of the year, we were living together in a little villa in Mount Eden, with a feijoa tree out the back and a cat called Biscuit, who had wandered in one rainy night and refused to leave. Reuben was 32, divorced once, no kids, the kindest man I'd ever met and the most observant. He noticed everything. Sometimes I'd catch him watching the way I made tea or read a contract and feel like I was being studied by someone trying to memorize me. We got engaged on the anniversary of our first coffee. He didn't propose with a ring at first. He proposed with a folder. He'd spent 6 months quietly putting together a binder for the wedding I'd casually described one night in bed. Small, by the water, peonies, my Nan's lemon cake. He'd booked 3 potential venues with refundable deposits. He pulled the ring out at the end, when I was already crying. We set the date for 14 months later, because I wanted Nan, who was 83 by then and not well, to be there, and we wanted to do it properly. The trouble started 10 months before the wedding. Des announced he was stepping back. He was 68, he said, and Maureen wanted to do the camper van around the South Island that they'd been talking about for 30 years. He was promoting his son, Fletcher, to managing director. Fletcher was 26. He had an MBA from somewhere in Melbourne and exactly 2 years of actual work experience, both of them at a consultancy where, as far as anyone could tell, he had mostly made slide decks. He had never carried a project. He had never sat across a table from a council planner being told no. He had never had to ring a structural engineer at 10 on a Sunday night because a contractor had poured something wrong. What Fletcher had was a watch his mother had bought him for his 21st, an opinion on every topic, and the absolute, unshakable belief that he was the smartest person in any room he walked into. He moved into the corner office on a Monday. By Wednesday, he had told me, in the kitchen, in front of 2 graduates, that the systems I'd built were a bit 1980s and that he was bringing in a consultant to take a look at them. By Friday, he'd canceled the next 2 training sessions I had scheduled, where I was meant to start cross-training Annika from the drafting room as a backup on the database. Unnecessary cost, he wrote in the email. Posey already knows it inside out. Why pay for redundancy? I sat at my desk and read that email 3 times before I understood what he'd done. He had just made me a single point of failure on purpose. He had locked me into the system he claimed he wanted to replace. I should have said something then. I should have walked into Des's office, even with him semi-retired, and laid it out. But Des had just lost his older brother to cancer, and Maureen's MS had flared up, and I told myself it was my job to manage Fletcher, not run to his father. Over the next 3 months, things got worse the way these things always get worse. Slowly, and then all at once. Fletcher took credit in front of clients for things I'd designed. He started pulling me out of meetings, he said, weren't relevant to my role. He hired a friend from his MBA, a man named Brody, into a vague operations strategy position at a salary that I later discovered was nearly double mine. He started making jokes about how the firm needed to modernize and trim some of the old guard while looking right at me, the youngest senior in the building. What I didn't know was that Reuben, sitting in his quiet little office at the council, was watching something else entirely. He was watching the drawings. Halloran and Quinn was the engineer of record on a council job called the Rarotonga Foreshore Reconnection. A big one. A $40 million pedestrian and cycle bridge that would link the foreshore back to the suburb after decades of being cut off by the motorway. The plans had been signed off 6 months earlier by our principal structural engineer, a woman named Nair, who had been at the firm for 20 years and who, I would later learn, had handed in her notice quietly. The same week Fletcher took over. After Ngaire left, Fletcher had taken personal charge of the resubmissions. Standard practice if amendments come up during construction. Except that the amendments coming back across Reuben's desk weren't standard. They were small, carefully chosen. A reduction in the spec of the structural steel for 2 of the spans. A change in the concrete mix for the southern abutment. A removal of a redundancy clip from the cable stays. None of them, on their own, fatal. All of them, together, money. And all of them filed with Ngayer's old digital signature, still attached to the parent document. Reuben had flagged it, quietly, 3 weeks before our wedding. He'd opened a file. He'd started keeping copies. He hadn't told me, because he didn't want me to feel like I had to choose between my job and the truth in the run-up to a day that was meant to be ours. Which is why, when Fletcher's text arrived in the courtyard at St. Mary's, my husband had smiled, because he understood, instantly, that Fletcher had just done him an enormous favor. I didn't know any of this yet. All I knew, sitting in the bridal suite at the reception venue at 9:15 that night, with the sound of my mother laughing at something downstairs, was that I had just listened to 17 voicemails from Des Halloran, each one more raw than the last. "Posey, this is Des. Please ring me. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Fletcher had no authority. "Posey, the Onehunga submission is due Tuesday, and the file system won't open for anyone, please. Posey, the consortium are threatening to walk. I'm begging you. Posey, love. I'm sorry. I'll fix it. Just please pick up." In the last one, Des, who was the steadiest man I'd ever worked for, was crying. I sat on the edge of the velvet settee in my wedding dress, with my shoes off and my phone face down on my lap. And for the first time since the text had landed, I felt something other than panic. I felt, very faintly, the shape of something else. Something cold and clean. Power. I had spent 5 years building a system so woven into my own brain that no one else in that office could touch it without me. Fletcher had spent 3 months making sure no one else was trained to. And now, on the day he had decided to humiliate me, I held every key to every door in that building. He had handed me a loaded weapon and walked away whistling. Reuben came in then. He sat next to me, careful with my dress, and he told me everything. About the drawings, about the steel spec, about the file he'd been keeping, about what Fletcher had been doing under Ngayer's borrowed signature. When he finished, I didn't say anything for a long time. I was thinking about a primary school in Onehunga, about Sunday cyclists, about prams, about what it means when a structural redundancy clip isn't there and a southerly comes through in 20 years. "What do we do?" I said eventually. Reuben looked at me. "Tonight, we go back downstairs and we have your Nan's lemon cake. Tomorrow, we get on a plane to Rarotonga. And when we come home, my love, we are going to do this properly. We're not going to burn it down. We're going to rebuild it. On your terms, not theirs." I leaned my head against his shoulder. The phone buzzed again on my lap. I didn't even look. "Today we dance," I said. "Today we dance," he agreed. We danced. My Uncle Tama gave a speech that made my mother snort wine through her nose. Nan, who could barely stand, got up for one slow turn around the floor with me to a crowded house song, and I will keep that 30 seconds for as long as I have memory. By the time the last guests stumbled out into the cool Auckland night, the missed calls on my phone had passed 200. The next morning, on the way to the airport, I switched the phone off entirely and put it in the bottom of my carry-on. Reuben watched me do it and didn't say a word. He just took my hand. Rarotonga was the slowest week of my life in the best possible way. We stayed in a thatched fair on the lagoon side, ate parrotfish for dinner 3 nights running, swam every morning before the heat came up. I read 2 novels. I cried, once, on day 3, in the shower, for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Reuben didn't ask. He just made me a cup of tea afterwards, the way he always did, and we walked down to the beach. On the 4th day, I turned the phone on, just to check it. There were 387 missed calls and over 600 messages. Des had offered to triple my salary, then to make me a partner, then to give me 10% of the firm. Fletcher had sent precisely 0 messages. Brody, the MBA mate, had sent one, a wonderful piece of work which read, "Hey, Pose, miscommunication on Friday. When you're back, let's grab a flat white and a line." A line. I switched the phone back off, and we went snorkeling. On our last evening, sitting on the deck, watching the sun drop behind Aitutaki in the distance, Reuben said the thing that changed my life. "There's a tender open at the Ministry of Business," he said, "for an independent verification framework on civic infrastructure submissions, the kind of system that would catch exactly what Fletcher's been doing. Council's been wanting one for years. They just don't have anyone with both the engineering systems background and the council side experience to write it." I looked at him. "You mean me. I mean you, my love." I didn't sleep that night. By the time the sun came up, I had a 14-page document drafted on my phone. By the time we landed at Auckland International, I had a name, Westbrook Carmichael Verification, registered the following Monday morning at 9 a.m. with the company's office, a one-room operation working out of the dining room of the villa in Mount Eden, with Biscuit asleep on the printer. I rang Des back the same afternoon. He picked up on the first ring. "Posey." "Oh, thank God. Whatever you want, name it. Please." "Des," I said gently, "I'm not coming back." There was a long, terrible silence. "I've started a consulting firm. My first client is the ministry. I'm going to be writing the new framework for verifying civic infrastructure submissions, the framework that will be applied retroactively, Des, to open jobs, including the foreshore bridge." I heard him breathing. I heard, very faintly, the sound of him sitting down. "Posey," he said, "what has my son done?" "You need to ask him that, Des, not me. But I would suggest, before you do, that you instruct your lawyers to pull every resubmission filed under Ngaire Taipin's signature in the last 6 months. And I'd suggest you do it today." I hung up. Reuben was watching me from the doorway with 2 cups of tea. "Was that hard?" he asked. "No," I said. And then, after a moment, "Yes. He was good to me, once." "He was," Reuben agreed. "And then he wasn't there when it counted." I started at the ministry the following Monday. Within 3 weeks, I had drafted the first version of what would eventually become known, in a small way, in a small industry, in a small country, as the Westbrook Protocol. It was, at its heart, a very simple idea. Every structural amendment to a signed-off civic plan had to be cross-verified by a separate party against the original engineering sign-off, with a hash-locked digital trail that couldn't be edited after the fact. No more borrowed signatures. No more quiet substitutions. If you wanted to change a steel spec on a public bridge, 3 different sets of eyes had to see it and sign for it, and the file would remember forever. Des, to his credit, ordered the audit himself. He didn't wait for the ministry to do it. He hired an independent firm out of Wellington, and within a month the picture was undeniable. 11 separate submissions had been altered after sign-off, all of them on jobs Fletcher had been personally managing, all of them filed under Ngaire's expired digital credentials. The savings to the firm, on paper, were close to $400,000. The risk to the public, if any of those structures had failed in 20 or 30 years, was incalculable. The Onehunga foreshore bridge was halted. The contract was reassigned to a competing firm out of Tauranga. Fletcher's name went onto the IPEN's disciplinary register for unauthorized practice and breach of professional standards, which in a country the size of New Zealand is a death sentence in the engineering industry. Brody quietly disappeared back to Melbourne. Halloran and Quinn lost roughly $6 million in the space of 2 months. Their 30-year reputation took a hit it would take years to recover from. I heard, through a friend of a friend, that Des had a bad turn on a Wednesday in November and spent 2 nights at Auckland City Hospital being checked for his heart. I sat with that news for a long time. I won't pretend I felt nothing. I had loved that old man, in the quiet way you love a good boss, and the part of me that wanted Fletcher leveled also wanted Des untouched, and life isn't tidy enough to give you that. My business grew. By the end of the first year, I had 3 council clients, 2 ministry contracts, and 4 staff working out of a proper office in Newmarket. Reuben got a promotion at the council, partly off the back of the work he'd done documenting the original concerns. We sold the villa in Mount Eden and bought a slightly bigger one in PT Chevalier, with room for the baby we had begun, very quietly, to talk about. Biscuit came too, and immediately claimed the new printer. A year to the day after my wedding, a thick cream envelope arrived at my office. Real paper, real ink, a handwritten address. Inside was a letter from Des. "Dear Posey," it began. There are some debts that can never be properly paid, only acknowledged. I have spent the last 12 months acknowledging mine. He went on. He told me Fletcher had completed an ethics course mandated by the registration board and was working, under heavy supervision, as a junior coordinator at a remediation firm in Hamilton, a long way from any signing authority. He told me he had brought in a new managing director, a woman from a Christchurch firm who had been on his shortlist 7 years ago and whom he should have promoted then. He told me every single submission process at Halloran and Quinn had been rebuilt around the Westbrook Protocol, and that they had, voluntarily, opened their books to a quarterly external audit for the next 5 years. Then he wrote the part that took me a long time to read. Posey, I knew, on some level, that my boy wasn't ready. I knew, and I did it anyway, because he is my son, and I wanted him to have what I had built. I sacrificed your safety, and the public's safety, on the altar of my own pride as a father. There is no version of this in which I am not the architect of what happened to you. I am writing not to ask you to come back. That bridge is, as you said, ash. I am writing to ask if you would consider meeting with me, not as a former boss, as a man who would like, before he runs out of time, to look you in the eye and apologize properly. Whether you say yes or no, please know that the respect I have for you has only grown. You were right to walk. You were right to build. You were right to protect people who will never know your name. With deep regret and deeper admiration, Desmond Halloran. I read the letter 3 times. Then I walked it home and put it in front of Reuben at the kitchen table. What do you want to do? He said when he'd finished. I want to go, I said. I think I need to. We met 2 weeks later. He'd asked, by return letter, if I'd be willing to come to the office. I almost said no. In the end, I said yes, because I wanted to walk through that building one more time as someone who had chosen to be there, instead of as someone who had been pushed out. It had changed. New faces, new light in the front foyer. A woman called Mariana, on reception who I had never met, who stood up and shook my hand and called me Ms. Westbrook with such genuine warmth that I almost lost my composure in the lobby. Des was waiting in the small meeting room, the one he used to take me into to show me drawings. He'd lost weight. His hair was whiter. He stood up when I came in, and so did the man sitting next to him. Fletcher. I hadn't expected him. I went very still, Des said quietly. Posey. I asked him to be here. I won't make you stay. If you'd rather he leave, he'll leave. I looked at Fletcher. He didn't look like the boy who had texted me on my wedding day. He looked tired, older than his 27 years. He had his hands folded on the table like a child waiting to be told off, and when he met my eyes for half a second, I saw very clearly that he had not slept properly in a long time. He can stay, I said. We sat down. Des spoke first. He said the things in the letter, out loud, looking at me the entire time. He didn't cry. I think he had cried himself out months ago. When he was finished, he looked at his son and said, Your turn, boy. Properly this time. None of the prepared rubbish. Fletcher looked up. Posey, he said. His voice was rough. I owe you everything you're owed and more. I was scared of you. I was scared of how much the firm needed you, and how little it needed me. I told myself I was modernizing. I was bullying you. I told myself you were old guard. You were 5 years older than me, that's all, and you knew more than I'll ever know, and I couldn't stand it. The wedding day text was the worst thing I have ever done to another human being. There is nothing you could ask of me that I would say no to. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He stopped. He didn't try to fill the silence. That, more than anything else he said, told me he had actually grown up. I sat with it for a long moment. I thought about my Nan, who had made it to the wedding and then died 11 weeks later, peacefully, in her sleep. I thought about my dad, gone too early, who used to tell me that the measure of a person isn't what they do when they're winning, it's what they do when they're losing. Thank you, I said eventually, for saying that. I didn't say it was all right, because it wasn't. Some things aren't, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of dishonesty. Then I said, I'm going to send you a contract, Des, for my firm to consult, on a non-exclusive basis, on the rebuild of your internal verification systems, quarterly reviews. Independent oversight. Your books open to my team. The fee will not be small. Des laughed, a wet, surprised laugh, and wiped his eyes once with the back of his hand. Yes, Posey. Whatever you want. And Fletcher. He looked up. When you're cleared to return to a senior role, which by my reckoning is at least 4 more years away if you do everything right, you can apply for work with my firm. I won't promise you a job. I'll promise you a fair interview. That's more than you offered me. He nodded. He couldn't speak. I stood up. Des stood up too, and on impulse I hugged him, very briefly, the way you hug a man who used to bring lemon slice to morning tea. I didn't hug Fletcher. We weren't there yet. We might never be. But I did, on my way past, put my hand on his shoulder for 1 second. He flinched, and then he didn't. And I walked out of that building for the second and final time as someone who had chosen the door. Outside, on Customs Street, Reuben was leaning against the car. He'd insisted on driving me, even though I could have walked. He took one look at my face and opened the passenger door. All right, he said. All right. We drove home along Tamaki Drive with the windows down. The sea was flat. A container ship was coming into the port, slow as a thought. That was 3 years ago now. Westbrook Carmichael employs 11 people. The protocol I wrote in a thatched fair in Rarotonga is now the standard reference document for civic infrastructure verification in 3 regional councils, and the ministry is consulting on rolling it out nationally next year. Des sold the firm to his new managing director 18 months ago and is, finally, doing the camper van trip with Maureen. They send me a postcard every couple of months. The last one was from Te Ano. Maureen's MS is stable. Des sounds, in his small, careful sentences, happy. Fletcher works at a remediation outfit in Te Awamutu, low and slow, rebuilding. He sent me a card when our daughter was born last winter. Just congratulations, and his handwriting, and nothing else asked for. I framed it, actually, and put it in my office, where I can see it from my desk. Not as a trophy. As a reminder, because here's the thing I have learned, the thing I would say to my daughter when she is old enough to hear it, the thing I will say to anyone reading this story, who has been on the receiving end of a wedding day text or its equivalent. There is a kind of revenge that feels good for an afternoon and costs you everything afterwards. And there is a kind that takes longer and is harder and asks more of you, and at the end of it, you have built something that protects people who will never know your name. The first kind makes you a smaller version of the person who hurt you. The second kind makes you the kind of person they will spend the rest of their lives quietly trying to become. When the worst day of your professional life hands you the keys, you have a choice about which door you open. You can open the one that lets you burn the building down, or you can open the one that lets you redesign it. I chose the second. I would choose it again. And if you are standing in a courtyard, somewhere in your own version of a wedding dress, reading a message that has just tried to take everything from you, I want you to know 2 things. The first is that the people who try to humiliate you on the most important day of your life are showing you, in that moment, exactly who they are. Believe them the first time. The second is that the door they slam in your face is almost never the only door in the building. Sometimes, if you are lucky and patient and willing to do the slow work, you find out it wasn't even the most important one. Today, look at who is standing beside you in your courtyard. Look at who reaches for your hand instead of your phone. That is where your real life is. The rest is just architecture. And architecture, as I have spent my whole career learning, can always be rebuilt.